I haven't read a single word, a single page of a novel in the last 7 or 8 days. I haven't finished any books this past week, which is a first for me in the past 2 years. I have nothing really to talk about in this weekly wrap-up, so it's not really a weekly wrap-up. All I've been reading are short fiction magazines, and I have no idea when I'm going to get back to reading novels. I don't want to say that I'm going to and then not. Just going with the flow. This past week, I was kind of mentally and emotionally sidetracked with some stuff going on. I could tell immediately that's how this past week was gonna be, so I decided to just focus on reading short stories instead, and that worked out so well for me. I'm really glad I did that because I plowed through a bunch of magazine issues that I needed to get to, and for whatever reason, that works a lot better with my brain. Probably because I can sit down and read an entire story in 15 minutes and I feel like I have accomplished something and it's like my reading quota for the day. I thought I would take a moment to tell you about the magazines I read really quickly. I talk about my favorite short fiction stories every month when I do the live show with Joe, but I only talk about a couple of stories and I don't really talk in detail about the magazines I'm reading. So this past week I read Uncanny Magazine issue 10. It has a gorgeous cover by Galen Dara. The cover did the rounds on Twitter and everyone blew up about it. It's probably the prettiest magazine cover I have seen all year and it's just awesome. Issue 10 was so much better than issue 9 in my opinion. Issue 9 wasn't bad. I just had a hard time even finding a real favorite in it that I could get into and immerse myself into. But this month there's some interesting ones, so I'll tell you about those. My absolute favorite from this issue was The Sound of Salt and Sea by Kat Howard. This one is a little ironic because it contains all of the elements of fantastical stories that I am currently tired of, like blood and bones and sacrifice, and I'm just a little tired of those things being used all the time as mystical woo-woo, aren't we in a real fantasy story type of thing. But for some reason, this entire story is about that, and I liked it. I just was really impressed. Ye Highlands and Ye Lowlands was the story by Shauna McGuire in this, which I love the title and I love the inspiration. Apparently she wrote it to a prompt she was given, and it's a really cool idea. It's one of those disastrous alien first contact stories, and I really liked the scientist part of it, like the story of how they got to that point, but when it got to the catastrophe, I was kind of bored. On the other hand, I listened to the first part of this, I listened to it after I had read it. I listened to the first half on their podcast, and Amal El-Motar narrated it, and it worked a lot better there. I think the emotion just came through better. El-Motar is a really fantastic narrator, so maybe I should listen to more of the stories on the podcast. You'll Surely Drown Here If You Stay is the novelette, I think, by Alyssa Wong, and I was really interested in reading that one because she just won a Nebula Award for a story I haven't read, probably because it's from Nightmare Magazine and I'm scared of horror. You'll Surely Drown Here If You Stay was really well written. I love the idea, but it's a fantasy western and I don't like westerns. I really don't like westerns. And the other story in here that I thought was notable was The Plague Givers by Cameron Hurley. It's kind of a reprint. She first released it on her Patreon and then is reprinted here. And I liked this. It was very Hurley, but the setting wasn't urban. It's basically set in what I think of as like a Louisiana bayou or a swampland. And so it's still got that gross stuff that Hurley is kind of known for in her world building, but not in a city. And I like that. It also had a lot of gender fluidity, which I've come to kind of expect from Hurley as well. I can't really tell you why I liked it more than that because that would give away the ending, but there's something that the main character does at the end where I was like, well, that just defies all expectations and social norms, so thank you. Then there is Apex Magazine issue 84, which was mostly PUD for me. I was really looking forward to this one because it has a reprint of The Drowned Celestial by Lavi Tidar, and I liked the story, I just didn't love it. I could easily see it as being part of the world he created for Central Station, but it's probably not. So it was enjoyable, but if it had been any longer than it was already, probably novelette length, it would have drug on for too long. This one also has 1957 by Stephen Cox in it, which was an interesting idea that I think involves time travel or something. I was quite into it, but the end was so without answers, so ambiguous that it was kind of a letdown. Asimov's April-May issue was double. There were a lot of stories, a novella, bunch of novelettes, including the short stories, so there was a lot to read. I very much liked the longer stories in this one over the short stories. A couple of them just really worked for me, and the short stories were mostly meh. The novella Lazy Dog Out by Suzanne Palmer I thought was just okay. Parts I was quite enjoying it because it's set on a space station and there are pilots and they all have nicknames and stuff, but it needed probably to be almost a novel length, needed to make you care about the main character and the setting, the space station, before the terrorist attack started, because it lacked tension. I wasn't attached enough to anything in the story to really feel like anything was in danger and I cared. The novelette Flight from the Ages by Derek Kunskin was probably my favorite out of this entire issue. It reminded me quite a bit of Ships and the Culture from the Culture series by Ian M. Banks, but it has a definite legal, accounting, banking bent to it at first, and then it turns into a million-year-long tale about a disaster like wiping out the galaxy, the universe slowly, and the ships and civilizations fleeing from this. The ending made absolutely no sense, but I thought it was very fun, and the details were hilarious and well done. It felt like a real science fiction story. A lot of stuff about artificial memory, artificial intelligence, and ships, and the multiverse perhaps, and black holes and time travel and all that. It was pretty cool. Clarkesworld's May issue, number 116, was a letdown for me. I didn't enjoy most of the stories that much. The classic fiction was one by Joe Abercrombie, and I'm not a grimdark fan. Lightspeed is the other one that I haven't quite finished the issue yet because I'm waiting for the last two stories to be available online for free, but it was okay. Hungerford Bridge by Elizabeth Hand was my favorite because it's very short and has nothing to do with death or dystopias or anything. It's just a fantasy story about a guy who shows another guy something and says you must keep it a secret, and I really like this story. I don't know if this is the one that has the alien birth story in it. The birth will take place on a mutually acceptable research vessel by Matthew Bailey. This one made me so mad. It's about a human woman who's married to an alien. They're having their first child, and it's the first, interspecies, cross-species child to be born. And all of the medical people, the politicians and everything are taking over this birth and controlling it instead of letting the woman and her husband have control over like her own body. Yeah, this story made me mad. It had some funny parts in it. I liked how it had some levity to a pretty serious topic about, honestly, women not being allowed to control their own bodies even when you're doing something that is absolutely something that only women can do. Women should be the experts on that. This is also the issue that has The Jaws That Bite, The Claws That Catch by Shauna Maguire, which I expected to love this one because it's inspired by Jabberwocky. That is my favorite poem of all time, but it deviated into Alice in Wonderland territory, and here's the thing about me. I don't like Alice in Wonderland inspired stories. I have learned this recently. I don't enjoy them. Something about Jabberwocky? Yes, but retell Alice in Wonderland? No, I don't care. So I was disappointed in that, but the beginning and the end of the story have great Jabberwocky references that I quite liked. I think that was enough reading of short fiction for 1 week. At this point, for the rest of the month, I'll be reading some Tor.com stories. I have 3 or 4 I want to catch up on, and then I might finally get around to reading stories from Strange Horizons. I've neglected that magazine all year. I need to get a subscription to make it easier so I won't forget. This is probably a much longer video than I intended it to be, but that's what I read this past week. Yay! If you've read any of these things, please let me know so we can talk about short stories, and I will talk to you again in my next video. Bye.